Rattan Kaur. I'm a full-time electronics engineer and a multi-passionate artist based in India. I started my art journey with my Instagram page, The Purple Splash, back in 2018. I started with brush calligraphy but went on to explore different mediums like watercolors, acrylics, gouache, collaging, digital art, and learning different subjects like florals, landscapes, portraits, mixed media journaling, and illustrations. I had always felt that I am someone who starts something with a lot of enthusiasm and excitement but is never able to complete it. And this was showing up in my art practice as well. Even though switching things up can be a great way to boost creativity, but I still wanted to have a consistent art practice in the middle of all the experimentation that I wanted to do. So, in order to build that consistency and to challenge myself, I started a self growth challenge called ABC Art Challenge by TPS around 2-3 months back. The prompts were chosen alphabetically as the name suggests, and I decided to do quick, loose watercolor illustration. I knew that I'm naturally good at sketching since my school days, but I struggled with color. So I wanted to learn the fundamentals of color, color theory, mixing, tones, etc. So I combined both of these to have like a balance of comfort and challenge. Currently, I'm in the middle of the challenge and I thought why not have you guys join me for the next prompt and learn how to paint quick, loose watercolor illustrations with me. I have broken down my process into 3 simple steps and I'll walk you through each one of them. So let's get started. Basic supplies that you need for this class are watercolor paper, pencil, kneadable eraser, any good quality artist grade watercolor paints, round brushes, ceramic palette, water jar and paper towel. Prompt for today is P for peaches, and this is the reference image that we'll be using. If you're someone who struggles with painting from real life references, I recommend getting the reference picture printed and keeping that handy with you. The first step is observation. Now, according to me, this is the most crucial step. If you're able to observe your subject well, I think it's a half battle won situation. So it's important to train our eyes to be able to observe better. If you ask me how, I have a few pointers that can help you improve your observation skills. Let's see what they are. But before that, let me give you a small tip. Use the reference image printout to mark these pointers or digitally mark them on an iPad or a tab. Pointer number 1, shapes. Try to simplify complex subjects into simpler shapes like lines, circles, rectangles, triangles, etc. like I've shown here. Number 2, contour. Contours are basically the crests and troughs or the texture on the surface of an object. Paying attention to this will help you create more 3D looking paintings on a flat 2D surface. For example, in case of peaches, the pulp part is very smooth whereas the seed is highly textured. So you can account for this while you're sketching and painting. Number 3, proportions and rhythm. A lot of artists, including me, struggle with getting the proportions right. One tip that I'd like to share is to take any one length in your composition as the reference and eyeball all the other measurements relative to that reference length. I'll explain this further while we start sketching. There's another great tool that you can use called the grid method. I've mentioned more about this in the free downloadable PDF, so you can check that out. Number 4, values. Value refers to the darkness or lightness of the color. I personally struggle to add darker values, fearing that I might ruin the painting, and I think a lot of artists do. Dylan shared an amazing tip in her Skillshare class titled Still Lives Are Cool, which is to use black and white printouts to study values. Here you can see this is the color printout and this is the black and white printout, and it's clearly visible in the black and white printout the areas where the value or the color has to be darkened. Number 5, shadows and highlights. This is to account for the light source, keeping in mind the areas that are highly lit and the areas where shadows are formed. You can observe and mark shadow family and highlight family like this. In case of high contrast reference images, marking the terminator line can be very helpful. Terminator line is the line separating shadow family and highlight family. Other notable pointers to look for can be temperature, perspective, but these are topics worth another class, so we'll not go into them. Now, having said all of that, I want to let you know that you, as an artist, have the creative liberty to choose what details you want to put on paper from amongst all the details that you have observed, and how you want to put them on paper. So, you can go as abstract as you want or as detailed as you want. Now, I'll be sharing what my process is, and you're welcome to join in and follow it step by step, or you can choose to do it completely in your own style. Now, let's move on to the second step, which is sketching. Now, I know a lot of artists are scared of drawing and sketching, but I hope this class would be able to navigate that fear in some of you. So, be ready with your pencils. Let's dive right in. Before sketching, we'll take some time to observe our reference image. I'll start by marking a few guidelines on my reference image, starting with marking the boundary of my working area, which in this case is a square. Next, I'm marking the center line that divides the composition horizontally. Vertically, I can see the whole composition split into thirds, so I'll mark those guidelines. Now, I'll go ahead and roughly mark a few boundaries with respect to these guidelines, avoiding halves and thirds. I can also see the rhythm between the curve of the seed and the boundary of the peach that is behind, and I think that's pretty much it. I'll start sketching by first drawing these guidelines lightly. Then I'll start blocking large shapes, followed by detailing and then marking contours, shadow or highlight areas. Now, I'm a loose sketcher, and if you struggle to let loose while drawing, I recommend holding the pencil from far behind or like this. As you can see, I'm roughly drawing a square, then dividing into halves and thirds. This half cut peach catches my eye the most, so I'll start with it, marking the axis which is slightly tilted and then sketching its slightly ovular shape. Now I'll use this half cut peach as the reference to build the remaining composition around it. I'll try to incorporate as much as I can from what I observed into my sketch. I am going very light with pencil at this stage because we don't want to ruin our watercolor paper. Once the rough sketch is done, I'll go ahead and erase the guidelines and lighten the pencil marks. Using a kneadable eraser is recommended because a normal eraser might ruin the surface of watercolor paper. Next, I'm going to fine-tune the sketch and add details. This step gives me another chance to correct any dimension mistakes or add anything that I had missed while making a rough sketch. Usually, I don't do all of these steps when I sketch. All the marking on the reference image that I'd shown you is what goes on in my mind before starting an illustration. So once you start practicing these techniques, you will not need to follow these many steps. And we're almost done with our sketch. At this stage, you can choose to fade the sketch using ink pen to give that ink and wash look, or leave it as it is. Make sure to lighten the pencil marks because once graphite comes in contact with water, it is extremely difficult to erase the marks. And we're done with step 2. Before moving on to the third step, I want to talk to you about adding character in your illustrations. Our brains work in astonishing ways. Certain details speak to some people more than they do to others, and that's where your style and character shines through your sketches. You can start by trying to imitate the real life references and then eventually experiment and add your own character and quirk to the illustrations. So learn the rules first and then break them like an artist. Now let's move on to the third and final step, painting. I'm not an expert with watercolors or fundamentals of color, but I'll share whatever I know so far. At this stage, you can really play and add your individuality into the painting. As for me, I like to keep it quick, loose, yet slightly realistic, keeping in mind all the basics of light, shadow, and value. I'll start by giving a light wash to the illustration and then go on to build layers of more saturated paint. This will add a lot of depth to my illustration. I'm using a very diluted yellow for the light wash. this peach yellow as well, because in the reference image I can see that there are some areas which are yellow. So when I go ahead and paint red above this, I can leave some spaces which will show yellow so that we get that look. I can see that this is a slightly cooler yellow and we need warmer tones for the peach pulp, so I'm adding a tinge of orange to make a nice peachy shade. Now I'll be using wet on wet technique here, so I'm adding a lot of water and I'll add this watery peachy paint into the painting. And then take very saturated red and add it around the seed area. Since the yellow paint is already wet, it will create this beautiful bloom which automatically creates this effect in my painting. You can add more paint to some areas where saturation is slightly higher. Similarly, I'll go ahead and add this red on the peach slice as well. I'm dabbing the brush in this way, leaving some negative space as well. Now I'll add the skin of the peach like this. Keeping the brush upright will help make pointed thin strokes. Since I'm going for a loose look, it's okay that this red is slightly flowing into the pulp area. In case you don't like this effect, you can pick that red paint using a clean dry brush. Next, I'm starting with the right peach, painting it loosely with red, leaving some negative space where I can see yellow showing up in the skin in my reference picture. Keeping a rough piece of the same watercolor sheet handy can be useful to make swatches and to test water to paint consistency before putting it on the final piece. Use the paper towel to adjust the water level in the brush. Similarly, I'm adding red in different saturation levels on the peach that's at the back. I'm building up the layers, adding more paint where I want to increase the saturation, adding more depth. Next, I'm adding Payne's Grey to red to get this darker shade for shadow areas. Make sure the layers below are dry. adding some details here and there, adding darker shades on the peach skin where needed. Now we're moving on to the seed. I'm adding burnt sienna, dabbing the brush like this. I'm mixing a bit of burnt umber to darken the brown, again dabbing the brush in a dotted kind of way. Now, while it dries, let's paint the leaves. I am not going too much into the details of the leaves. I'm using a mix of sap green and yellow for the base coat. We'll wait for this to dry and go back to the seed and add final darkest values. I'm using a lot of Payne's grey mixed with burnt umber for this one. Now I'm using Payne's grey for the shadows. I'm putting the paint on the dry paper and then using a clean watery brush to blend it slightly into the background. Next, I'm adding a bit of Payne's grey to sap green to darken it and add some veins and shadows to the leaves. Finally, I like to add some watercolor splatters around the illustration. And this completes our illustration. That's all for this class. I hope you enjoyed creating with me and found the tips that I shared useful. You can check out my work on Instagram, follow me there, and subscribe to my newsletter for monthly educational content and freebies. I'm also conducting monthly paint parties with a new guest artist each time. The idea is to have a safe space to paint freely and let the creative energy flow and play without any judgments. So I'll be very happy to have you guys either as a guest artist or as a participant. Lastly, I welcome you all to join me in this challenge, so you can share your artworks and tag me and use this hashtag, so I'll be able to see what you guys are creating. That's all for now. I hope to connect with you on social media. Till then, take care, keep creating, keep painting. Bye bye.